Hi, my name is Ankit Rajiv Jindal and I am the founder of Friends for Inclusion. Our vision is to empower people with disabilities through technology, and we do this by creating and evangelizing technology and accessibility standards for all. I am also a senior marketing manager in a leading multinational IT services organization. So today we are going to talk about the role of ICT in fostering inclusion for people with disabilities. We are going to understand what disability is, how the understanding of disability has evolved from one generation to another, what is the role of assistive technology in the lives of people with disabilities, what steps has the government taken so far, and what steps businesses and civil societies can take in the future. By the end of this session, I am hopeful that all of us will be able to appreciate the role or the usefulness of assistive technology in our lives. We are also able to understand how the assistive technology landscape needs to evolve in the country. So let's start in our solution, in our presentation today. Really, let's start from what has been the definition or understanding of disability over the years. Really, if we go back in 1980s, the World Health Organization gave us a definition, and it said disability is any restriction or inability on account of an impairment that restricts one to do activities considered normal. So this was a definition which was well understood and accepted in the 1980s. Here the onus was on the individual. The definition purely said that if you have an impairment and because of which you are not able to perform certain activities like studying or working at at a job or traveling to some places, then you would be considered disabled. Now the onus was completely on the person and it was completely attributed to the medical condition of that individual. So as a result, what happened? Let's see in this particular slide. The onus shifted really. The implication was that the person became the center of the problem, and the understanding at the larger level was, I am not able to study if I am a person who is blind because of my blindness. I am not able to work at a particular office because I am a wheelchair user. I cannot wine and dine in a restaurant because I have a condition like a leprosy. So everything was with the person and not anything with the society. So as a result, what would happen? The government and the policy makers and every other stakeholder focused more at the individual. The policy were a lot more welfare oriented. The idea was to give charity, to see how we can help that person and see how we can try to overcome their limitations. The society and the environment outside was completely absorbed of this responsibility of inclusion. Come 2000s, in the new millennia, we changed the whole way of looking at disability. Now this happened after a lot of advocacy and a lot of thinking that went behind it, and the new definition of disability was something which was a lot more complex. It was just not about my or somebody's own impairment, but it said that it's a complex phenomena when one's impairment, so somebody's disability may be of an eye or having any physical impairment, when it comes in contact with a person's environment, and this environment could be physical environment, technology environment, and when they come in contact is when they've experienced disability. So let me give you an example. According earlier, the understanding was I cannot study. If you're blind, you cannot study because you are blind. But in the newer definition, the understanding has changed, and it says that today a person who is blind cannot study because he do not have accessible materials. Now, books and materials can be made accessible for people with disabilities. They need to follow certain accessibility guidelines, but because they do not adhere to those guidelines is when a person with disability experiences the whole phenomena called disability. So it's really a phenomena. It's just not about much more individualistic in nature, but it's also an interaction between a person's body or person's impairment or the features of one's own body with the features of the environment. So let's try to understand what is the implication. The focus really shifts away from the person or correcting the person to the environment. Now, as a result, a person who is blind is not said कि you cannot study because you are blind. You say कि a person who cannot study because he or she does not have materials in accessible format. Of course, we discussed this. There is a person who is using a wheelchair is not disabled because he uses wheelchair or he cannot walk, but he or she is disabled because the environment or the building does not have accessibility features like ramp or a lift. Similarly, a person who is affected by leprosy and wants to wine and dine in a restaurant is not able to do it not because he has a leprosy, but it is because the management in the restaurant is not informed enough or perhaps aware enough to accommodate a person who has any such condition in his or her restaurant. So really the problem is not so much with an individual. Today, if a person is on a wheelchair and is an MBA or an engineer like many of you are, what really differentiates them or perhaps what really causes a problem to them is not that they are less qualified. It's just because of their disability, they need certain physical environment, and if the workplace has those kind of an environment like an accessible ramp, accessible washrooms, having a lift, they will be able to perform on par with as anybody else. If you don't provide them is when they experience disability. So really, if you have accessibility incorporated in your environment, a person's experience of disability can be reduced. Now so when you really think in that context, so what the really focus or the nuclear really shifts from the person to the society. We then try to make changes in the environment. So in case of a built environment, we will try to see if we can accommodate accessibility into this. We will audit a building, we will see if it has ramps of a particular standard. The ramp cannot be extremely steep, so that person is not able to kind of use the ramp on his own. We will also see there is buildings, has an elevator or not, does it has accessible washroom, and then there are standards, and these so buildings are audited not just on the basis of certain set of individuals, but then there are well accepted standards both in India and abroad. In India, the harmonized guidelines are the recommended standards for which really lays down in detail what standard that one needs to follow to make the built environment accessible. By following these standards, you will be able to make most you will be able to cater to the needs of most disabilities. Similarly, when it comes to the digital work environment or the digital ecosystem, there are accessibility standards. These standards, for instance, are called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and in short we call it WCAG or WCAG. Now WCAG's current version is 2.1, and really, like in the physical environment, if you follow these accessibility guidelines, you will be able to cater to the needs of most disabilities. And by following WCAG, a range of people, including those who use screen readers, those who have seizures, those who have magnifying glass, who has difficulty in hearing, and many others will be able to access your IT in an equal basis. So that's where the focus shifts when the thinking evolves from a medical model where we really blame a person for his or her own disability, where we say कि your a particular body part is not functioning and thus you are not normal, you need to be you need to have a subnormal life, to something more contemporary today where we say it's okay, diversity is part of the human evolution. We all are different. It's just that some of us need some different accommodation. So what you have difficulty in seeing or hearing or walking, if our environment can cater to your needs, will truly create an empowering and an inclusive environment. So that's really the evolution or the understanding of disability. And if we really move forward, it talks about the types of disability, and as we also briefly touched upon earlier, they're difficult, the disabilities range from difficulty in seeing. So there are people who cannot see at all, they are blind, or there are people who can see, who are partially blind, or there are people called low vision. So they are not able to see properly in spite of using glasses. Similarly, people who have difficulty hearing can be classified into two broad categories. The people who are deaf, who cannot hear at all, they generally use sign language as the primary mode of communication. And then there are people who are hard of hearing, so they can partially hear. They often use hearing aid. Then there are people with locomotor disabilities. They have difficulty using in either of their limbs, the upper limbs in case of your hand, or the lower limbs in case of your legs. Now these difficulty could be on account of many conditions. It could be on account of an accident, it could be on account of a particular disease like leprosy, or it could be an account of a paralysis, stroke that one encounters, or it could be because that you have any other condition. Similarly, there are difficulties related to a person's cognition, or as we call it, intellectual disabilities, and the range of conditions which gets included, including autism, which are often considered as intellectual disabilities. Mind you, again, not all persons who have cognitive or intellectual disabilities are, as in any other disability, they are on a spectrum. There are people, and there might be here in the room, who might have milder instances of autism, which often is hard to notice. And there might be cases which may be at the other end of the spectrum, which are far more complex and far more severe. So yes, intellectual disabilities can also be on a very wide range, and it really varies from people to people. Similarly, there are difficulties in learning. So we've all seen the movie Tare Zameen Par, and we've all seen the story of Ishan, who had dyslexia. Like dyslexia, where people have difficulty in reading characters, There are other disabilities like dysgraphia and dyscalculia. Dyscalculia is a condition where you have difficulty in reading and processing numbers. Then there are psychosocial disabilities where you have difficulty in social interaction and so very acute depression, bipolar disorders, schizophrenia are all kind of considered as psychosocial disabilities. There are other disabilities which are on account of certain health conditions. These health conditions may vary from neurological conditions, a blood related disorder or organ failure. Similarly, there are conditions related to age. We often age, and in India especially, we don't really like to say that we are disabled, but really many of us have our grandfathers and parents. They start having difficulty seeing or hearing, and those really cannot be corrected even with a spectacle or a hearing aid. So there's no shame in accepting that with age there is an onset of disability. Estimates says from 1 in every 4% to 1 in every 2% after a particular age, depending from 60 or 65, they do start experiencing disability. Of course, as we said, the range is wide, and really the onset really depends on various factors. So yes, these are various types of disabilities. It really ranges from different types in terms of seeing, hearing, intellectual, psychosocial, physical, intellectual. Now I know a lot of you must be thinking, for many of us disability was just seeing, hearing, and somebody who was not able to walk properly. But yes, I think that's the takeaway that we also want to take away, that disability is just not restricted to a few conditions. It's a far wider phenomena, and it's just not because of a particular medical condition. Really, if a person has difficulty seeing in spite of wearing glasses, he has he or she is experiencing disability, and they may or may not need certain assistance to overcome that. So if we really look at the numbers, and this slide 7 really talks about the statistics around the number of people with disabilities. Now, if I would have to ask you to take a guess, how many people in our population would have a disability? In most cases, I do get a number which ranges from 1% to 2%. Now, World Health Organization and United Nations and many other of these international bodies do estimate that 15% of your population experience one or the other form of disability. So really, if you look at a global scale, the total population size is actually 1 billion people with disabilities. Now, if you look at it from an India point of view, again, like everything else, we have a spectrum depending on what source of data that you refer to. According to the census of 2011, we have about 2.6 crore or 26 million people with disabilities. Mind you, at that time we had only canvassed for about 7 disabilities, and as a country, our definition or understanding of disability has also evolved with RPWD Act, so it is definitely an underrepresented number. If you go by the estimates of the World Health Organization or the United Nations, we have about 15%. So for a population which is about 1.35 billion, we would have roughly 200 million people with disabilities in the country. Now, 200 million people with disabilities is a huge number. If you really put all of these people in one place, will form the 5th or the 6th largest country in the world by population. It's a huge number. Even with the most conservative number, and if you go by the census, which is the 26 million, uh, our population will still be will be bigger than 75% of the world's country. 75% of the world's country has population which is less than 26 million people, uh, which is the number for people with disabilities in India. So clearly it's a huge phenomena. One may wonder that why people with disabilities are not seen, but it's not because they're lacking in number. It's often because we do not have an environment which is inclusive enough. Think of it, if you are walking on a footpath, we find if a lot of us find it difficult to use a footpath generally. It's full with they are not maintained properly. There are hawkers, there are bikes, there are trees. There's so many barriers that we all encounter. For people with disabilities, it becomes that much more tougher for them to navigate just the footpath. And really, if you extend this, the accessing buses, metros, any other buildings, the workplaces, your malls, the schools, the colleges, most of them are not designed to cater the needs of people with disabilities. So yes, I think that's the reason we do not see as many people with disabilities in generally as we should have been seen otherwise. But make no mistake, it's a huge population and certainly must not be ignored. Slide 8 talks about the vicious cycle of poverty, and we extensively discussed about the barriers that exist. Today there are a number of barriers that people with disabilities encounter, whether it is to do with physical environment. So we've discussed that the buildings are not accessible, the roads are not accessible, the transportations are not accessible, they are not inclusive enough. Similarly, there is an IT ecosystem which is not equally accessible for people with disabilities. They are not catered to it. There's a big attitudinal barrier that exists. People have a very patronizing attitude. We all tend to feel, oh, people with disabilities are bicharas and they need to be protected and they need to be safeguarded. But then really, we don't see them as a worthy citizens or contributing citizen. And the numbers are there to talk for themselves. If you really look at this, 1 in 3 people are getting worthy employment, and these are numbers from census. Really less than 10% of the people are able to complete any decent education which could be there. So we say in disability we have a vicious cycle of poverty. Because you do not have access to resources, you do not get access to education. Because you don't get access to education, you don't get employment, and because you do not have employment, you do not have resources like money to really invest back and upgrade yourself. So we are trapped in a vicious cycle of poverty, and this has been going on for generations after generation. And really, if you come from a very well-off family, that's a very different story to somebody who comes from, and that's the whole case for most of the people. We really come from very modest families. In fact, the World Health Organization or the United Nations estimate that 80% of people with disabilities live in extreme poor conditions. They are the one who are the marginal of the marginalized community. They live in extreme poverty and they find it extremely difficult to make the ends meet. So let's come to about ICT, and really we are here to understand the role of technology in the lives of people with disabilities. So really, when you see technology or ICT in context of people with disabilities, I would like to really start with making a very simple distinction. You have two types of this technologies. On one hand, you have the mainstream technologies like the mobile phone, your desktop operating systems like Windows, smartphones like your Apple or Android phones, your television. All these are mainstream products which are used by most people at large. On the other hand, there are specialized products. These are called assistive products. Now, these assistive products help people with disabilities perform a certain task, and they are often designed and developed for their specific needs. So, there are a whole range of assistive products that exist today, right from a wheelchair, a hearing aid, a smart cane, to something which is more sophisticated like a screen readers. The most popular screen readers, for instance, are JAWS and NVDA. As I'm speaking, I have my computer being configured with a screen reader called JAWS, and I'm hearing, my system is actually converting all the text into speech, and I'm able to kind of read through my notes because there is a screen reader installed. Similarly, there are other assistive technologies like speech to text, which really converts speech into text. We all are very familiar with it. It's really nowadays a big buzz. There is also a lot of other in terms of captioning, audio description. All these are different forms of assistive technologies or systems which are in practice today, and they form a very important part of the ecosystem. Examples of assistive technology at use, and really this is not an exhaustive list, this is a very small list, and I just wanted to kind of show how different types of people with disabilities are using technology in different scenarios. So, there are tactile materials which are being now developed using 3D printers, and often some adhesive material that they are using, with which really is able to kind of create a more tactile experiences for diagrams, maps, and and people or students who have vision disabilities are actually able to study thanks to those tactile graphs or diagrams that are being created. Similarly, the deaf community is using videos with caption. Now, we all would have seen subtitling on our when we watch movies. Now, captions are very similar to that, but they also often tend to describe a sound. So, for instance, if there is a dog barking, a captioning, if it follows the best practices, it will also say that a dog is barking or a doorbell rang, in addition to the dialogues being transcribed in the case of subtitles. And captions has been extensively been used by the deaf community to read and view lectures, and in different environments, whether it's workplace or education. Similarly, text-to-speech word prediction softwares, today they are a big rage. We are using text-to-speech in our smart speakers, whether it's through Google Assistant or Alexa, or we are using it in so many applications, voice-activated application. But many of this was first developed to help people with disabilities. Similarly, predictive text, many of us have been using this amazing feature while texting or WhatsApping, but again, the roots of predictive text was to help people with certain learning disabilities or certain intellectual disabilities, to help them predict words and make spelling corrections, and they are able to kind of perform on par. So yes, that's those technologies are being extensively used for people with disabilities. Similarly, today there are a number of iPad and smartphone based applications which have been developed, which help people with on autism spectrum to organize their life and be a little more independent in their lifestyle. Similarly, there are schools in the country which use FM systems, the which actually are tied in, which are linked to a person's hearing aid, and they are able to kind of listen to the classroom lectures much more effectively. Many schools for the hard of hearing use this technology to deliver lectures for them. Similarly, accessible controls for gamings are used for people with certain physical impairment to perform day-to-day activities. Another way a lot of people are actually using using assistive technology is using smart speakers or assistants like Alexa and Google Speaker to manage their home environment, to really saying an Alexa or a Google Assistant to turn on or off my lights or refrigerator or air conditioning. So really the whole smart home, while it is good to have for many of us, it is really a source of independence for many people with disabilities, and that really doubles up as an assistive technology for them. Slide 11, and what I really want to discuss through this particular slide is really today, earlier we would consider a mainstream technology very different from assistive product which was specially designed for people with disabilities. But in the last few years, thanks to advances in artificial intelligence, machine learning, a lot of these things, these two worlds are slowly but surely merging. We have seen and we've discussed how many of these technologies, which first actually began in the realm of supporting people with disabilities, to now which has become a more mainstream application. So really these two worlds are merging, and they will continue to merge, and I think that's a very interesting thing. And it's slowly we are kind of inching towards the phenomena called universal design, where you will have products and services which can be used by a lot of people without having a need to have separate design or separate attachment. So no more you may need to have separate braille books. Tomorrow the books for the tomorrow will be inclusive enough, which can be accessed equally by people with and without disabilities. Similarly, if you are able to kind of if you have a smart home, people with and without disabilities would be able to kind of access the features of it fairly independently. And this is where we are really getting towards take for instance self-driving cars. Of course we all are very excited about this amazing technology, so much of research being happening, so much of investments being poured in. Really biggest companies in the world, whether it's the Google, the Teslas, the Ubers, major academic institutions both in India and abroad, they all have shown interest in the self-driving car. And if you really look at it, self-driving car does not have to conform to the design principles of the today's car. It may come in various shapes and form, and that can be a radical improvement for the lives of people with disabilities. If I am a person who is blind, I don't, suddenly the need for having assistance or having a driver just vanishes, because tomorrow I'll have a self-driving car and we will be able to navigate as equally independently maybe as anybody else. Similarly, smart TVs today, now I've just purchased an Android TV which is completely accessible, so I'm able to now navigate, set my own preference, start watch audio described movies on Netflix, thanks to the merging of these two worlds of the mainstream and the assistive technology. So yes, these two worlds are merging, and these are exciting times, and it will continue to be more exciting with a lot of features being integrated in coming days and time. So, yes, we've understood what disability is. We've also understood the role of technology and how it is so beneficial for people with disabilities. We've also understood how the two worlds of mainstream technologies and assistive products are slowly but surely merging. But really, what's then stopping the full mainstream adoption? Really, there is a huge barrier that exists, and let's discuss some of the barriers that exist today as we speak in terms of creating more an enabling environment for inclusive ICT. First, really starts from the lack of willingness of and the understanding of the policymakers. Really, our policymakers do not understand the need of assistive products. We need to educate them. We need to create an intent that yes, assistive technologies or products are very important. They require research and investment, and they're really not about people with disabilities. If you really look at it, it's about functionalities. It's about the activity limitation that one encounters, and thanks to assistive products we can overcome it, whether disabled or not disabled as understood in the classical terms. So we really need more policies that encourages promotion, development, research around assistive products, and more willing policymakers around it. Really, there's very little awareness beyond policymakers also. Even if you have a certain functional limitation or you are a person with a disability, in India we still don't have enough awareness around it. I often say the blind and the low vision community has been the biggest adopter of technology, but really if you go beyond it, and especially if you go even in this community, if you go beyond the cities or major cities of Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, Ahmedabad, it really starts tipping. The awareness of IT or the importance of IT or assistive products in the lives of people with disability is just not there. We need to build more awareness around it, even with the stakeholders or the users of such disabilities, or even with the family supporters. So that's another big reason why we are not seeing ICT being adopted by people with disabilities at large. The third biggest barrier that I personally see is the affordability. Many of the technology today that we're talking about are extremely expensive. We need to have more indigenous solutions. We need to have more affordable solutions. So take for instance, there is our screen readers now. The most popular screen reader is called JAWS, and a license of JAWS can cost you around $1,000, which is about 70,000 rupees in India. Even if you go with a subsidized version, for students it's still very expensive, and it's just not about the software. You also need to own your own laptop. So all put together, you are nearing about a lakh rupees of investment. Now, a lakh rupees of investment is not a small thing. We need to understand in a country where which really is finding it difficult to make the ends meet. It's difficult to invest in such technology and in such expensive technology. So we need to create more affordable indigenous solutions. Of course, similarly, it's just not about ICT, but it's also about other products. Take for instance wheelchairs. They are also very expensive. While for most of us, we may see wheelchair is a wheelchair and it is not very different, but it varies. There are so many different types of wheelchair, and those wheelchair needs to be accommodated to different needs, because one may have a paralysis, somebody may have a spinal cord injury, somebody may develop bed sores. All those have different conditions and have different implications on one's body. So really a good wheelchair needs to be more personalized. They need to follow standards, and yes, there are standards for wheelchair, but really we don't have that kind of an approach in India, and we need to invest a lot more on these. So affordability, and really that brings me to the next point, which is the unavailability of ICT and assistive products. Many of the products that we really think and see about independent living are often not available in India. So take for instance, there is a talking OTG available in the Western and developed countries, but the same products are not available. Another classic example that I often talk about is that many of these service provider OTT video service providers, for instance Amazon Prime, they have content available in audio description in their western part of the world, but for some strange reasons they have not enabled the option of audio description. So really availability of such products and services is another big challenge, and we need, and which is really kind of creating a barrier for adoption of ICT. Of course, lack of acquaintance. So of course, even if you have products and services, we do not have an ecosystem which trains people on assistive products and making the best use of it. Even there are many NGOs lately which has come up and been training people with low vision and blindness on screen readers like NVDA or JAWS, but even with the best of effort, those NGOs are fairly small, and they really can't suffice the need of the huge population that exists. And as we discussed earlier, at least there are many other disabilities who do not consider IT very important, and as a result of which they have not invested in enough either to understand technology or even train people that come in contact of them to understand technology. So yes, lack of acquaintances and ecosystem or a willing ecosystem is another big challenge which causes a barrier. There are no scientific assessment criteria. In many cases, there's no way of recommending what product, what solution works for you. So as a result, we don't really know if I can use certain product or not, or if this is going to be helpful to me at all or not in my environment. There's no point of kind of recommending a very sophisticated computer programming program to a person who doesn't have basic computer skills or is not even willing to understand computers or have an aptitude towards that. So you need to create more solutions which is more apt for that time and environment. So yes, all these factors, and there are enough and more factors. This is definitely not a very comprehensive list, but definitely major points that exist today and are definitely the major points which are causing barriers today. So let's come to the key legislative milestones that as in India, how we are enabling or what exists really currently today in the ecosystem as far as assistive products or accessibility is concerned. So really India, for large part of the time, 1947 is when we got independence. 1995, nearly after 50 years is when we got the first disability legislation, which was the Persons with Disabilities Act of 1995. Half a century gone, and really people with disabilities had no identity. Even then, really when it comes to accessibility or inclusive assistive products and technology, there was very little movement till the new millennium, and in the first policy came in 2009. There was a web accessibility policy which was kind of introduced by the government of India. 2013 is when we created the national policy for electronics and universal goods. It really talks about adopting universal goods, universal design principles, and creating more inclusive products. But again, this has been largely a piece of paper which has not been really brought into effect much. 2015 is when we had the Accessible India campaign. Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, they have a department dedicated for people with disabilities. So they launched an Accessible India campaign and this was flagged by Prime Minister Modi, and they took aggressive targets as far as making websites accessible, making buildings more inclusive, transportation, airport. A lot of big targets were kind of laid out. Yes, there was certain progress made, and of course, in many cases, we were not able to achieve those. But yes, Accessible India was a very important milestone where accessibility kind of broke in some ways the glass ceiling, and it entered the it kind of got some mind share with the bureaucracy. There was extensive awareness campaigns which was built, and that kind of mainstream, at least started to mainstream accessibility in some ways or the other. And 2016 is when we got a new law, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. It is the new legislation which was formed on the basis of the United Nations Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities. 2016 is when this act got passed. And RPWD Act has several provisions on accessibility. I'll just come to the provisions in RPWD Act in a while. 2017 is we had two major kind of landmark coming in. We got inclusion of accessibility in the manual for procurement. Now, the government, if they need to procure certain goods from anybody, they have a certain manual which really lays down the details of the features or the requirement that they have. Accessibility was included in that manual which details such requirements. So accessibility was incorporated in that. 2018 is revised guidelines for Indian. The government they had something called GIGW, the guidelines for Indian government website. This was reviewed and updated to form guidelines for the Indian government's apps and website. It incorporates the latest WCAG standards and incorporates the principles around the latest accessibility guidelines. And these were the legislative framework. Slide 14, RPWD Act, and this is the landmark act that we talked about, and it has a huge focus on accessibility. It really provides, it includes ICT in its ambit. It has a wider definition of communication. It has recommended standards for technology accessibility. So GIGAW is the recommended standard for making apps and website accessible. 2 years timeline is been provided by the government in the RPWD Act for making the services accessible. Now, services also has a huge definition, and it covers everything from healthcare to banks to telecom to website or web-based application. All of them in some form or the other are included in this definition of services, and services have been given 2 years from June of 2017 is when they have notified the rules. So from then to now, June 2019 is that they have to make their services accessible. if they do not make their services accessible, they are liable for punishments for the breach of the RPWD Act. RPWD Act also has a mandate on promoting universal designs as far as products and services is concerned. It does talk about creating more accessible content or information on television, and the government of India under the aegis of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has set up a special task committee who is actually examining how content could be made more accessible or inclusive for people with disabilities. So really these are some of the major highlights on RPWD Act, which talks about accessibility and which are more relevant in context of information technology and assistive products. Moving ahead, we're talking about international best practices for procurement. Now, we often say if you have to really make or encourage accessibility, you have to make accessibility a mandatory requirement, and what better way of enforcing it than really having the biggest buyer of these products and services mandate it. So many countries which like the United States and the European Union, they have standards for making for procuring goods and services which are accessible. In the case of United States, there is Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, which has strong mandates, and if you are a company and you want to do business with the government, you have to make sure your products are accessible and they follow the guidelines and the standards as recommended in Section 508. If you do not, you are not eligible to work in or do any kind of a business with the government of USA. Similarly, the European Union, they have a guideline for procurement, and the countries and the businesses, when they want to work with the government, they need to ensure that the accessibility is given due prominence, and without which they cannot work with the respective governments in the EU. Now, you would say, okay, how does it really make a difference? Now, let me give you an example. Many of the IT companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, now many of them have, they're known for the inclusion and the thought leadership as far as creating more inclusive designs and products for people with disabilities. And yes, it is true, they have made significant effort and their leadership has been far more empathetic towards the need of people with disabilities. But it is also true that one of the very important reason that they continue to invest in accessibility and making it better is because they are supposed to do business with the government, and if they need their products to be used or be purchased by the government of the USA, they need to be sure that these work for people with disabilities also. So as a result, they have kind of invested a lot in terms of making their products and apps or websites very inclusive and more accessible. And as a result of it, many of us in different countries have also benefited. Now, so Microsoft, for instance, if I take example, the Office 365, their current version of Office productivity suites, which contain Word, Excel, PowerPoint, they all have extensive accessibility features, and they've been kind of researching and adding more accessibility features. Of course, it's not only driven by the fact that the business of the government is at stake, but without that provision, I think that won't have happened in the way or manner that they're doing it now. And really, it's just not the US government or the citizens of the United States who are benefiting. Thanks to this strong legislation, consumers of these products across the world, like we at India, are able to enjoy the same product, same accessibility features in India because there was a very strong mandate there. So it just doesn't help you, or just doesn't help the government or its employees or their government's direct stakeholders, but it really helps the community at large. And sooner than we realize, it really creates a ripple effect all over the world. It's this is a classic case where strong legislation mandate can really foster inclusion, and clearly something which is very much missing out in India. We still, although accessibility has been included as a feature in the manual for procurement of goods and services in 2017, it still is not a very mandatory or a non-negotiable item, and still the government continues to procure a large number of products, services, websites. They build newer buildings without having any consideration for accessibility in them. And really, if government doesn't do it, who else will? So I think we all need to reflect upon that. We need to be very cognizant of that, and we need to encourage government for on that. Slide 16 talks about the technical standards that exist today as far as accessibility is concerned. I have restricted my findings to technology related standards. We've discussed Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. These were released by the World Wide Web Consortium, and the current version is 2.1. There is an authoring tool accessibility guidelines. These guidelines are more useful for authoring tools such as Captivate or any other web tool like Adobe WordPress, the WordPress website builder. Then there is user agent accessibility guidelines. These are useful for something like a media player, how to ensure accessibility of them. Accessible rich internet application, these are also known as ARIA. Today the web has evolved, there are a lot of rich application. So these standards provide recommended guidelines on making rich internet applications more accessible. There is also independent user interface accessibility guidelines. There is EPUB guidelines for making electronic publication documents, EPUBs, more accessible. There is also the PDF UA guidelines, which talks about how to make the most ubiquitous document format PDF more accessible. So a number of standards today already exist globally. Some of them have also been incorporated in India in GIGAW. So really you could look up on the internet and find these resources. I would encourage you to go through them. This would help you get an understanding for the needs of how to make your technology more accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities. And mind you, many of them are not rocket science. In fact, it's very simple. In most cases, you would find that these are common sense, these are best practices, but often common sense is also not very common. So we often tend to kind of miss out on best practices, and we like to kind of take the shorter route and just get our work done. But just take that a little extra time, go through these guidelines. This will help save you a lot of ordeal, because now even in India we do have a mandate for accessibility. and it is pretty much applicable for all sort of companies, including the private sector. So sooner or later you would, if you are a, if you are someone who's developing any kind of a technology, whether it is on the desktop or for the mobile phones or on any other interface, you may be required to kind of adhere to these guidelines. And now that you have kind of experienced this particular session, I would strongly encourage you to read these guidelines. This will help you to become more accessible. So really the slide 17, we really trying to understand how different stakeholders like the government, business and civil society, what they have done so far. And what I've really tried to do here is try to do a kind of some little of analysis, and would be saying okay, what are the good things or the highlights or the lowlights that the government or the stakeholders have done in this space. We start with the government, and really if I have to say, of course the government has been taking a lot of effort, and if I have to really see the highlights, passing of the RPWD Act was definitely one such thing, which did provide a big mandate for accessibility, which covered a private sector. So definitely that's one big highlight. The government has been setting up various task committees, including most recently they have kind of set up a task committee in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and TRAI to understand, in the case of information broadcasting, they want to see how television can be made more accessible. So they're exploring the use of sign language and audio description there. TRAI had a more wider mandate, and they actually completed their round of consultation last year, and we'll be kind of seeing through some of their recommendation very soon. But yes, so government has taken steps towards that. They have revised the GIGAW guidelines. The Department of Empowerment for People with Disabilities have announced that there are more than 100 websites that they've been able to make accessible. I think that's a landmark achievement, and we need to applaud the government for the effort. Clearly a lot more needs to be done. By some estimate, there are roughly about 8 to 10,000 websites under different departments and ministries and PSUs. So of course 100 is the first step, and we still need to go a long way before accessibility is incorporated in all those websites, government apps and website. Lowlights, we still do not have a very a holistic view of it. We still have a very patchy thinking as far as accessibility. It's often very reactive and not very proactive in nature. So the government needs to be pushed, and they would react or take certain action. We still do not have a holistic policy or a guideline on assistive product at a larger scale, which really cuts across different stages, from research to encouraging manufacturing to distribution, or making it things more available in the country. We don't have that kind of a thinking yet evolved in the country. ADIP, there is a scheme called ADIP with the government, and it is being carried out by the Department of People with Disabilities. They distribute a lot of products under ADIP scheme, but 80% of those products are largely for the products which are procured by Alimco, and these Alimco products are like wheelchairs and crutches and many of them. They're not so much on IT, and the list of products is also not often updated. It is the last, I think, the revision happened in 2013. Clearly, when technology is evolving so fast, ADIP schemes like ADIP should also need to be updated far more frequently. It largely caters to few disabilities, and many other disabilities needs are not taken care into. Accessible India campaign, while it was a wonderful campaign, but really the implementation left a lot more wanting. It has not yet been fully, the objectives have not yet been fully actualized, and we need to, we need to still go travel a long way when these objectives could be materialized. A huge number of buildings, many places they have not even done access audit. A huge number of places where they've completed access audit, there was no action kind of executed on it. So many websites were supposed to become accessible, but just about 100 or so have become accessible. There's so much of emphasis today in the government on digital India, e-governance, but accessibility really is very low in the priority. So definitely a lot more desired as far as government and ICT implementation is concerned. As we discussed just a while ago, the government or the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, which is the regulator for telecom services in India, they conducted an extensive consultation in 2017 and 18. They invited representation or opinion from a variety of organizations, including telecom service providers like Airtel and Vodafone. They also invited the direct to home service providers like the Tata Sky or Dish TV and internet service providers. So a lot of these people kind of provided their inputs, and so was the disability sector, invited to give in their recommendations to TRAI. Now they have kind of released a recommendation in July, and some of the recommendations that they have kind of given here are. It recommends that India should have a steering committee under the aegis of Department of Empowerment for People with Disabilities, and which should be more cross departmental, cross ministerial in nature, and should have representation from Ministry of Electronics and IT, Corporate Affairs, Ministry of Consumer Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Standards. So all this ministry needs to be kind of should be participating in that particular committee, and should have a more holistic thinking in this subject. The government should mandate device manufacturers to create at least one of the product SKUs which have universal design principles and they are accessible for all. If you are a telecom services provider or internet service provider or even a cable operator, you should have a specialized desk or a call center or provide training to your staff to cater to the needs of people with disabilities. We often seen when people with disabilities call the call center and they ask about, they give their concerns, the staff is just not able to understand those queries. So yes, the TRAI recommends that the contact center staff needs to be better oriented and equipped to take to the needs of people with disabilities. It also talks about emergency services and how they should become more accessible and inclusive. India has created their own 911 number. It's called 112. It is at early stages of rollout, and of course it's going to become very essential. So how can we make this very important services more inclusive? How do we make it multimodal in nature, so that say somebody who's deaf can also reach out to them maybe through SMS or chat, and somebody who can actually reach out to them through call or even any other thing. So yes, it needs to be a far more robust, multimodal in nature, and should be able to kind of cater to the needs, because emergency services will be taking, they'll be dealing with lives, they'll be responding to situation of disaster, and if we are not able to kind of make them exclusive, we're talking inclusive enough, we will be actually causing huge problems for them. Continuing with second part of the recommendation, it also recommends that there should be accessibility standards for other products like phones and other types of electronics. A certain percentage of all channels content should be developed with audio description and sign language included. In 5 years, any mobile manufacturer who produces 5 or more mobiles in the country must have at least one phone or device which meets the accessibility criteria. All TV set-top box service providers should have at least one a set-top box version which is more accessible and has accessibility features incorporated in it. And of course, lastly, it also mentioned about government when they procure any product, ICTs, they should ensure that they are accessible right from at the procurement stage. So they should be encouraging this. The next stakeholder that I would want to talk about is the business. Really, we discussed earlier that now, thanks to RPWD Act and the wider definition that it has taken, clearly the private sector has come to the fold of it, and thus all the accessibility features are also equally applicable for people, for the private sectors. And private sector really includes anything from a sole proprietorship to a partnership or a factory or an NGO or an association of people or a private limited company or a public limited company. All these kind of are included in the definition. So clearly nobody is out of the definition. And of course, if we really look at some of the highlights and the lowlights, there has been some effort especially by industry bodies like such as NASSCOM and FICCI in terms of creating more awareness on RPWD Act and the provisions and what it means for those sector companies. We've also seen a lot of these startups and tech-based companies who have invested in AI and have tried to create early stage products like Seeing AI. It was a software application developed by Microsoft using artificial intelligence for the low vision and the blind community. Similarly, there are other applications such as ID by Gingermind Technologies or 6x6 by Barrier Break, which again use technology for and things like AI to overcome barriers for people with disabilities. Lowlights is limited awareness of RPWD Act. In spite of a lot of effort, a lot of awareness needs to be built more around RPWD Act and its applicability on the private sector. There's no sense of urgency. We discussed June of 2019 is the deadline by which more services ought to become accessible as far as RPWD Act is concerned, but really the needle hasn't moved fast enough, and there's very little sense of urgency as far as creating more inclusive or making their services more inclusive for people with disabilities is concerned. Corporate CSR, now India CSR is a very powerful tool. It can provide resources for a huge number of initiatives, but still CSR has not caught on to the bandwagon of accessibility. maybe the schedules, it will be good to have some more clarity in the Schedule 7, which really lists down the kind of activities that the companies can support. So maybe an emphasis on accessibility in Schedule 7 can be very useful, and by providing CSR can support accessibility in a major way. For instance, they can support research related activities, they can support in auditing, they can support in procuring certain goods and services. So it's there is a huge potential, an untapped potential where CSR can make a big impact. And mind you, some organization, for instance, Emphasis, they have been taking some amazing efforts in this space. And now Emphasis, through their CSR program, has collaborated with Uber Technologies, and they have actually launched Uber Assist and Uber Access cabs in Bengaluru. Uber Assist provides drivers training on how to help people with disabilities when they take a ride with them and when they have taken option of Uber Assist. And then there is Uber Access. They are specially designed cars which has features like AmbiLift and wheelchair lock. So people who are on a wheelchair and they find it difficult to transfer, they can actually use those cars and they can actually mobilize within the city. So yes, these are some of the highlights and the lowlights. As I mentioned, for the corporates or the business, there's a huge untapped potential, and they can leverage people with disabilities or focus in many areas. Some of these are kind of mentioned here. They can be a very active workforce. We talked about 15% of population being disabled, 1 billion globally, nearly 200 million in India. So they can be a source of employees for you. They bring diverse thinking in your organization. So definitely that's an area of opportunity for the business. Second is seeing people with disabilities as a consumer base. And there was a study done, and they said people with disabilities and their immediate social circle influence a total disposable income of about $8 trillion. That's far higher than the total GDP of India. Now, if I give you an example, now in my home, we often use Amazon over Flipkart because we find Amazon a little more accessible. So because I use Amazon, my family, we've all kind of pivoted around this. So my wife, my parents, everybody else have started using that application, not because of the better deals that we get here, but it's also actually because Amazon is more accessible, and because I find it more comfortable to use with my assistive technology. We've all kind of graduated or pivoted towards the use of Amazon. And this is one such example. There are many others, and it holds true in many other services, including transportation or food tech or banking. Accessibility really forms an important criteria as far as when we select a particular service provider, and it just does not impact me or my brother who are user of assistive tech, but it also impacts the purchase decision for the whole family. So clearly this number is not a misnomer, it's not an exaggeration. By making your products more inclusive and accessible, you actually tend to get access to their immediate friends and family members. And really, from an assistive tech market, the estimate says that the market is as big as $26 billion. It's a huge market, and where we need a lot of innovation, and especially in India, where we do not have enough technology available coming in from the West. It's important that we invest in this space and we try to find out solutions, assistive tech. ICT products which really helps us overcome these barriers. And one of the ways of doing it, you may want to, of course, you may want to take up specific problems and build solutions around it. But the other way of doing it is also that if you are engaged in building a particular product or a service, you make sure that that is accessible, that is inclusive for people with disabilities. By doing so, you anyways kind of traveled certain distance as far as making your products and ICT more inclusive for people with disabilities, and really breaking a big wall as far as exclusion is concerned. So huge potential. It's definitely an untapped opportunity, really, if you look at it from a market point of view or even from a talent resource point of view. Slide 22, civil society, and I think this is where all our responsibility comes in, and as individuals, as civil society groups, NGOs, what can be done, what have been happening. We have seen a lot of academia like IIT Delhi, IIIT Bangalore, who have actually taken up accessibility as a important stream. They are working on setting up a center of excellence. IIT Delhi has created something called a smart cane. They've created a braille book, a kind of a braille laptop which actually can create content and consume content in braille. They're also trying to work something to do with making or making bus transport more accessible for the blind community. Similarly, IIIT Bangalore has been incubating nonprofits like Friends for Inclusion and Vision Empower, who are working in the area of technology, and they've been trying to support them in terms of building more accessible solutions. So yes, there are some efforts happening as far as academia is concerned. There is some effort as far as to bring together an ecosystem. So organizations like Enable India and Samarthanam have announced that they will be setting up an ecosystem. They're bringing different stakeholders together on a common platform and see how assistive products can be more more researched upon, more made widely available, made more affordable. Of course, there are newer NGOs like Friends for Inclusion, Vision Empower, XRCV, many others who are trying to actually take technology much more seriously and see how it can be leveraged for making people, or leveraged to enable people with disabilities or overcome certain barriers. Low lights, definitely, I think we ourselves haven't really pushed for advocacy or the importance of assistive products or an assistive policy, assistive products policy at a larger level. Countries like the US has a board called an Access Board, which really influence accessibility in a lot of activities. But in India, we don't have something like this, so we need to really drive that a lot more with a lot more vigor and excitement. We have very limited exposure to understand new technologies, assess in what scenarios it's best useful. There is very little awareness, very little information available on the internet also. The NGOs do not have that kind of a capacity. They're not trained enough. They do not have the skills. So yes, that's a big problem. A lot of our efforts is very fragmented. It's not very it's not very consistent in nature. So as a result, again, not much gets achieved. A lot of things are actually they get started, but then they remain in limbo because we do not have a larger view of things. We do not have a consistent view of things. So yes, from civil society, these are certain analysis. Slide 23, and we are coming closer to the end of our presentation. And here's where I've kind of jotted down certain points. on the way forward, on what could be the possible focus areas for the government, for the business, for the civil society. So some of the points that we have kind of listed out here are, at the government, really we really strongly recommend that all ministries should start seeing disability as a core activity. People with disabilities exist everywhere and their needs are also equal as anybody else. So people with disabilities also need health, people with disabilities also need education, people with disabilities also need employment. So Ministry of Health, Ministry of HRD, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, they all need to have disability included. They need to have a disability unit established, and they should be able to kind of take care of the need of people with disabilities. According to an analysis that I did a while ago, about 26 such ministries can have a dedicated person or a dedicated unit for disability. Of course, the next important step is that we should adopt a very strong procurement standard. For procurement, I think we discussed enough about the importance of procurement, how it can actually create a positive ripple effect by having accessibility as a mandatory requirement in procurement of government services, products and services. So European standards are very good benchmark. Perhaps we should look at emulating them, adapt it to suit our requirement, but definitely accessibility should become a non-negotiable part of the procurement practice at the government. We definitely need both as the government, business and the civil society, we need to focus on being more aware on the RPWD Act and strengthen its implementation around at each stage, at each level. So it's very crucial that we build more awareness and we strengthen the implementation of it. The government was supposed to set up a Universal Design Institute, and this was committed in the 12th five-year plan, but not much has been achieved in that front. So it's important that we kind of fast track the implementation of it, and as we really encourage more research on building more standards or building more products which are more inclusive and more accessible in nature. ADIP scheme we extensively discussed. ADIP needs to be revamped, it needs to be made more robust, it needs to take into the need of a wider range of disabilities. It need to update products more regularly. You just cannot have a certain list being created and do not being updated for many years. Technology is improving at a breakneck speed, so we need to make sure that the ADIP scheme is also able to keep pace to it and able to accommodate the needs of people basis the advances in technology. We need, of course, ADIP needs to be revamped as far as making it more functional in nature. The way it happens today is that there's a one size fits all. So there's a very similar wheelchair that is being given to everybody without having to understand what kind of a solution do they need, what type of wheelchair do they need with an extra cushion, or do they need a lightweight wheelchair, do they need more agile, or do they need something more sturdy. I think that needs to be understood. So ADIP scheme needs to be made more objective, and instead of taking a very mass based approach, we need to look at making it more personalized. We should have more financial incentives, so the government should be actually looking at providing tax incentives, GST, maybe through GST, maybe through income tax, but really more incentives on creating more inclusive products. So this would really encourage OEMs or any other startups, if they are in an accessibility or assistive product space, and if they can be incentivized, that can be very important and very critical. Even from a consumer point of view, I think it's a good idea to see if we can subsidize not only through ADEP scheme but also for those who are buying. So somebody who has a certain, who's able to afford, but if through income tax, if we can provide a certain subsidy or a rebate, if you have procured certain assistive products, I think that could be very useful. Financial incentives is another important area that can be looked into for encouraging more assistive products and solutions for people with disabilities. With that, I really come to an end of my presentation. Clearly, people with disabilities are an important part of our society. They form a huge base. 15% is not small. It really translates into 1 in 7 person who has a disability. They may range from something very milder to something more severe, and so we need to really start accepting that people with disabilities are part of our life, and we all need to understand that the problem really doesn't lie with them. It really is a lot more outside. It's because of the barriers that we have created because of poor design that we have incorporated. So a building is not accessible not because of person who is not able to walk, but because we do not have ramps and lifts or accessible washrooms. Similarly, a product or an application is not usable by a person with disability, not because they are blind or they have a certain disability, but because the developers have failed to incorporate accessibility standards in them. So one needs to focus a lot more on accessibility. One needs to take care of the needs of people with disabilities. As developers, I would encourage you to look up on the web on accessibility standards in the area that you're working in. Whether you are a civil engineer who's trying to work with the buildings, or you are a computer science graduate, or somebody who's going to work in the field of AI or Internet of Things, there are accessibility standards in most cases. Look up and see how you can incorporate certain best practices. Really, and it's really not rocket science. It's fairly doable. All that one needs to do is be more aware, and once you're more aware, I'm sure you will be able to take care or understand the needs of people with disabilities. And it's just that one small effort can actually make a huge difference. So with this, I would like to take a pause, and I know it may sound a cliche, but remember, you can make a difference. You can make a difference in the life of 15% of the population who have been marginalized for a very long time. So please take care, have a wonderful time, and do remember people with disabilities do exist, and we need to come together, and together we will be able to create a more inclusive and an accessible environment. With this, I'm Ankit Rajiv Jindal signing off. Thank you.